Right now, in the age of hypersonic missiles that can literally cross oceans in minutes, the world's biggest militaries are pouring billions of dollars into something incredibly low tech.
Yeah, concrete.
Exactly, concrete. I mean, when you picture the future of warfare, your mind probably jumps to, well, autonomous drone swarms or maybe stealth bombers that are totally invisible to radar.
Or satellites doing, crazy surveillance from low Earth orbit.
Yeah, basically technology that feels entirely untethered from the ground. So why then is the future of warfare suddenly obsessed with buying up real estate and building permanent physical fortresses, thousands of kilometers from home? Welcome to today's Deep Dive.
Glad to be here with you.
Yeah, we are jumping into a really fascinating stack of excerpts today from a geopolitical report titled Strategic Vanguard, The Resurgence of Global Military Bastions. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this glaring paradox.
It's a massive paradox, yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, we have weapons that can strike anywhere on the globe, yet the major powers are in this frantic race to lock down physical territory.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the scramble we are seeing today, we really have to look at the massive miscalculation that the global defense establishment made at the end of the Cold War.
Oh, absolutely.
They essentially declared the military base dead.
They did. I mean, looking back at the strategic documents from the 1990s and early 2000s, there was this overwhelming consensus that large overseas garrisons just belonged in the history books.
Like they were dinosaurs.
Exactly. Planners were looking at a wave of technological leaps. They had precision-guided munitions that could, fly through a specific window from 30,000 feet. They perfected mid-air refueling, which theoretically gave bomber aircraft just unlimited range.
Right.
And they had total uncontested superiority on the oceans. So the logic was basically, if we can hit anything, anywhere, directly from our own territory, why maintain a massive, expensive, and frankly politically sensitive footprint on foreign soil? The buzzword in the source material for that era is expeditionary forces. It's this idea that you just don't need a heavy permanent fortress anymore. You just pack a lighter, highly advanced force, deploy them to a hotspot, neutralize the target, and pack up.
And for a military planner, expeditionary warfare is an incredibly attractive concept because it's cheap and it's fast. Or, well, at least on paper it is.
Yeah, on paper.
And the data from the early 2000s really seemed to validate that doctrine. You look at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they featured these lighter, tech-heavy units moving rapidly, relying on overwhelming air support.
But the text argues that was actually a trap, right?
Yes. Those conflicts masked a fatal flaw in the expeditionary model. They were fought against opponents who completely lacked advanced air forces, sophisticated surface-to-air missile networks, or what we call blue water navies.
Mm-hmm. Grounding that term for a second, just so we're all on the same page. A blue water navy isn't just a navy with a bunch of ships. It specifically means a maritime force that's capable of operating across deep, open oceans, projecting power really far away from its home ports.
Right, which is mathematically impossible without forward fueling stations and logistics chains.
Yeah.
But because the adversaries in the Middle East didn't have the capacity to sink a supply ship or shoot down a cargo plane, defense planners developed this very dangerous false sense of security.
They basically assumed they could always just fly whatever they needed into a theater completely unbothered.
Exactly. And the return of major power rivalry has entirely shattered that illusion.
Yeah, the text points out that when you start planning for potential conflicts with peer adversaries, nations operating their own stealth bombers, their own satellite networks, and precision cruise missiles, that whole expeditionary model just collapses.
It falls apart immediately. You can't just casually fly a cargo plane full of supplies into a contested zone if the enemy has long-range anti-air systems.
Which points to the core argument of this analysis, I think. Military technology evolves at breakneck speed, but the physical geography of the Earth does not. Think about a stealth bomber.
It's an incredible machine.
It is a miracle of modern engineering. It's capable of evading radar, dropping precise payloads, but a stealth bomber is essentially a highly lethal billion-dollar smartphone.
I love that analogy.
Right. It doesn't matter how advanced the processor is if you don't have a charger, a secure outlet, and a reliable power grid behind it, the battery always dies. Is that essentially what the source is getting at with geography?
It is. That's spot on. You can have the most sophisticated aircraft on the planet, but without a heavily defended runway to land on, specialized hangars to repair the stealth coating, and literally millions of gallons of aviation fuel stored safely nearby, it's basically a paperweight.
Wow, yeah.
Geography remains the ultimate force multiplier. The source details the immense physical requirements of these modern platforms. Naval vessels, for instance, they require deep-water ports with highly specific draft clearances.
And huge cranes, right?
Right. Yeah, massive industrial cranes to load heavy munitions. Advanced missiles require climate-controlled storage. I mean, if you leave precision electronics and solid rocket fuel sitting out in a humid, salty, tropical environment without proper facilities, the weapons degrade and fail.
What's fascinating here is how these bases transform theoretical military power into continuous real-world operational capability. The text looks at the sheer mechanics of response time.
Right, the speed factor.
Yeah. If a crisis erupts across the globe and you don't have a forward base, you are forced to initiate a massive sea lift all the way from your home territory. You are loading whole brigades onto transport ships and moving them at 20 knots across thousands of miles of open ocean.
Which takes weeks.
Exactly, it takes weeks. But if you have a fortified bastion already in the region, the troops, the fuel, and the command infrastructure are just, well, they're already there. It reduces response time from days or weeks to hours.
And that transition from physical geography to operational speed brings us to the actual ecosystem operating inside these bases. We're really talking about logistics now.
The unglamorous stuff.
The totally unglamorous stuff.
Yeah.
There is a deeply pragmatic reality to warfare that often gets overshadowed by the flashy technology. And it's perfectly summarized by this quote highlighted in the text. Amateurs discuss tactics while professionals discuss logistics.
That is such a striking quote because we see the tactics on the news all the time, right? The drone strikes, the fighter jet intercepts, but we rarely see the hundreds of maintenance hours, the miles of supply convoys, and the endless spreadsheets of fuel consumption that made those few seconds of combat even possible.
The analysis uses the conflict in Ukraine to really hammer this point home. Ukraine proved that modern warfare, despite all the algorithmic targeting and satellite imagery, is still fundamentally a brutal industrial contest.
Right.
It's a contest of mass and consumption. We were talking about the expenditure of up to 10,000 artillery shells in a single day.
10,000, that's hard to even picture.
Think about the physical mechanics of that. 10,000 heavy steel shells don't just magically appear at the front line. They have to be manufactured, loaded onto trains, moved across borders, offloaded onto trucks, hidden from enemy surveillance, and then finally delivered to the guns.
It's a massive supply chain.
High-intensity warfare consumes astronomical tonnages of material. We're talking replacement barrels for artillery that literally melt from friction, thousands of replacement drones, and rivers of diesel fuel. If you don't have a sprawling, secure logistical network of bases to warehouse and distribute that mass, your frontline combat power collapses within days.
And the source takes that Ukrainian reality and applies it to the Indo-Pacific, which honestly makes the logistical challenge look almost insurmountable.
Oh, it's a completely different beast.
In Eastern Europe, you have this vast network of highways and rail lines, but in the Indo-Pacific, you are dealing with the tyranny of distance. We are talking about thousands of kilometers of open ocean between land masses. You can't exactly run a continuous convoy of supply trucks across the Pacific.
Which is why those distributed logistics hubs, the island airfields, the deepwater ports, they completely dictate operational endurance. If a navy is trying to project power across the Pacific, it cannot run a supply line straight from a home port all the way across the ocean without stopping.
The fuel math just doesn't work out.
It doesn't work. Whoever controls the distributed logistics hubs, those stepping stones, controls the operational endurance of the entire force.
That totally recontextualizes how we view the ultimate symbol of naval power, the aircraft carrier. I mean, a nuclear-powered carrier, it looks like this independent floating city capable of indefinite power projection.
It does look like that.
It has a nuclear reactor, so it doesn't even need gas for its own engines. But the text really breaks down the vulnerability of its logistical tail. A carrier doesn't operate alone. It's the center of a strike group.
Right, it has an entire entourage.
Yeah, it is surrounded by destroyers and cruisers that run on conventional fossil fuels and need constant refueling. The carrier itself houses dozens of fighter jets that burn through millions of gallons of aviation fuel and drop munitions that need to be replenished constantly. Plus, it holds, 5,000 sailors who need thousands of pounds of food every single day.
Yeah, and to sustain that carrier strike group, you need a dedicated fleet of replenishment oilers. These are massive, slow-moving supply ships constantly shuttling back and forth between the carrier and a friendly port.
So they're super vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable. If an adversary can deny access to those forward ports or sink those slow supply ships, the carrier strike group eventually just runs out of jet fuel and food. The most powerful warship on Earth becomes a floating museum. So access to permanent bases is the anchor that allows a blue water navy to even function.
Okay, so if physical bases are this crucial for warehousing the bullets and pumping the fuel, it completely explains why nations are rushing to secure them. But here's where it gets really interesting. The report points out that the nervous system of these bases has completely evolved.
It has.
We aren't just talking about giant concrete warehouses for diesel and artillery shells anymore. The modern base operates as a highly classified information node.
Yes. The physical footprint holds the supplies, for sure. But in many cases, the primary function of the base is information dominance.
Right.
In the modern era, intelligence arrives and has to be processed long before a kinetic shot is ever fired.
Yeah.
Every physical base acts as a critical information node in a broader network. They house operations for electronic warfare, signals intelligence, cyber warfare, and early missile warning systems.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that actually works, because I feel like it can sound like abstract tech jargon. When the text mentions a base acting as a downlink, what does that physically look like in the context of a global military?
Good question. So consider a high-altitude surveillance drone flying over a contested strait somewhere. That drone is collecting terabytes of high-definition video and electronic signals every minute.
It's just a vacuum for data.
Exactly. But it cannot store all that data on board, and it needs to be piloted by operators who might be sitting in a bunker, say, in Nevada. So how does the data get from the drone to Nevada in milliseconds?
It has to bounce around, right?
Right. The drone transmits a signal up to a satellite, but that satellite has to beam the data down to a physical ground station, a base. That base on some remote island receives the signal through massive satellite dishes, processes the data through heavy server farms, and then pipes it into undersea fiber optic cables that carry it across the ocean floor back to headquarters.
So the digital cloud isn't actually in the sky. It's in the ocean and on the ground, which means if an adversary blows up that physical radio tower on the island or severs the undersea cable connected to the base, the drone operator in Nevada goes totally blind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or consider missile warning systems. A forward base might house massive phased array radars that are scanning the horizon for incoming threats.
And those take a ton of power.
A massive amount.
Yeah.
They generate incredible amounts of heat and require their own dedicated power plants just to function. The data they collect is fused with other nodes in the network to create a complete picture of the airspace. Every physical base is essentially a router in a global intelligence network.
Which perfectly explains the global chessboard we are watching right now, because these physical locations are critical for both heavy physical logistics and this invisible digital intelligence network. Major powers are systematically locking down strategic geography. We're seeing a global land grab.
We really are.
Let's look at how the different nations detailed in the source are actually executing this, just to break it down impartially based on what the text says. Starting with the United States. The text describes the U.S. strategy as an effort to maintain and modernize this unprecedented historical web of alliances and infrastructure spanning Europe, the Middle East, the Pacific, and the Indian Ocean.
But the U.S. is also aggressively shifting how that network actually operates. They are moving away from concentrating all their assets in a few massive, easy-to-target megabases.
Okay, so spreading out the risk.
Exactly. They are securing access agreements to distribute their forces across a wider variety of smaller locations. Think of it like a mesh Wi-Fi network in a large house.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. If you rely on one giant router and it gets unplugged, the whole house loses signal. But if you have smaller repeater nodes spread across every room, the network is resilient. So the U.S. is building a physical mesh network across places like the Philippine archipelago and various Pacific islands just to complicate any adversary's targeting.
Then we have China's strategy, which represents a massive historical pivot according to the text. Because for a long time, China's posture was focused strictly on defending its immediate coastline. But the source points to a major milestone, their first acknowledged overseas military base in Djibouti, sitting right on the Horn of Africa.
And Djibouti is incredibly strategic because it sits right at the choke point connecting the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. A massive percentage of global trade flows right through there. But China's strategy isn't just about purely military bases.
Right.
The text highlights their pursuit of port access across the Indo-Pacific, which analysts often refer to as the string of pearls theory.
This involves building commercial ports, right? But the text suggests they have a dual-use nature. How does a commercial container port suddenly become a military asset?
It all comes down to the engineering specifications. When Chinese state-owned enterprises construct or upgrade a commercial port in a developing nation, they often dredge the harbors much deeper than standard container ships require.
Deep enough for warships.
Exactly. Deep enough to accommodate the draft of a heavy military destroyer. They build reinforced piers capable of supporting the weight of military hardware, and they install specialized offloading cranes. So in peacetime, it's a bustling commercial hub for electronics and textiles.
But if things go south...
If a crisis occurs, the Chinese Navy suddenly have a pre-built, mathematically perfect logistical stepping stone, already integrated into the global supply chain.
Wow. Meanwhile, the source details Russia's focus on a completely different environment, the Arctic.
Right, a whole different theater.
As polar ice recedes, new shipping lanes are opening up, and Russia is pouring resources into refurbishing old Soviet-era bases, building new deep-water ports, and maintaining a massive fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers.
And operating in the Arctic is a complete logistical nightmare. I mean, the cold destroys equipment, diesel fuel turns to gel, and standard navigation systems fail. By securing that infrastructure now, they're essentially monopolizing the logistics of an entirely new ocean.
So every nation is playing to its geographic strengths and economic needs, but I want to ask you to highlight India's unique approach here, because the text dedicates a lot of ink to them.
Yeah, India is a really interesting case study. Geographically, India sits like a dagger pointing down into the Indian Ocean, which is the superhighway connecting Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and East Asia.
Prime real estate.
Prime real estate. But instead of trying to conquer foreign territory or build massive sovereign bases in other countries, which is obviously expensive and politically toxic, India is utilizing what the text calls military diplomacy.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
They are aggressively signing logistics exchange agreements with friendly maritime partnerships. So an Indian naval vessel can pull into a partner nation's port, say in Oman or Singapore, refuel, resupply, utilize the maintenance facilities, and head back out to sea without India ever needing to own the port or maintain a permanent garrison there.
I have to push back on that, though. I mean, relying on military diplomacy sounds great on a spreadsheet because it saves a ton of money, but isn't renting access incredibly risky?
It is a risk, yes.
Because if a major war breaks out, what stops a host nation from simply changing its mind? They could just declare neutrality, tear up the logistics agreement, and suddenly the Indian Navy is locked out of the port right when they need it most.
That is the inherent gamble of military diplomacy. It's a very real vulnerability. Sovereign territory is always safer than a rented pier. However, the text points out that India mitigates this risk in two ways. First, these agreements are usually mutual. The host nation relies on Indian naval protection to keep their own sea lanes open, so their economic survival is tied to cooperating.
Mutually assured economic survival.
Exactly. And second, India isn't solely relying on foreign ports. They are heavily militarizing their own sovereign island territories, specifically the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, to secure operational reach.
Which the source describes as an unsinkable aircraft carrier.
Spot on. Those islands sit hundreds of miles off India's eastern coast, directly commanding the western entrance to the Strait of Malacca. By upgrading the runways and deep-water ports on those islands, India effectively extends its logistical reach and surveillance umbrella over one of the most critical maritime choke points in the world, entirely on its own sovereign soil. If we connect this to the bigger picture, military diplomacy has become just as important as the military hardware itself. Whether you are distributing nodes like the US, building dual-use ports like China, dominating the ice like Russia, or leveraging diplomacy like India, the underlying mechanism is the same. I'd ask you to consider, when you look at a map of the world today, what stands out to you as you picture this shifting global map?
It's wild to think about. The most intense strategic competition isn't happening in traditional capital cities anymore. It's happening in remote shipping straits, small island chains, and deep-water commercial ports. So what does this all mean?
It's a massive shift.
Yeah. When we distill this ultimate takeaway from all the sources, it completely upends that sci-fi vision of warfare we started with. The future of warfare will not belong to the nation with the fastest missile, or the one that writes the best targeting algorithm. The future belongs to the nation that can sustain military power over time and distance.
Exactly.
The old maxim really holds true here. Weapons win battles, but logistics wins wars. And bases are what make logistics possible.
The physical board is being set right now. The next global contest may not begin with a dramatic missile launch. It is actually already beginning based on who occupies the world's most strategic locations today.
Which leaves us with a totally new and frankly terrifying provocative thought to mull over based on the text. We talked about how modern bases are deeply interconnected cyber and intelligence nodes that control all the physical logistics, the fuel distribution, the ammunition tracking, all of it.
The whole nervous system.
Right. So if that digital ecosystem is what allows the heavy machinery to function, could the most devastating first strike in a future war be an entirely bloodless cyber attack?
Oh, wow.
Right. What if an adversary doesn't drop a single bomb but simply turns off a key base's digital ecosystem, instantly crippling a nation's ability to project power? If the logistics software is frozen and the radar is blind, you've just bricked the charger. The billion-dollar smartphone dies without a single physical shot being fired.
It's a sobering thought.
It really is. A lot to think about as you watch the global map evolve. Keep questioning the assumptions, stay curious, stay analytical, and keep exploring your sources. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.
Thank you for joining us on this Strategic Vanguard podcast. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you fresh podcasts every Monday here on YouTube and Rumble, and you can also catch the audio versions on Spotify and Amazon Music. Just search for Strategic Vanguard Podcast. For more insights, articles, and discussions, subscribe to our blog at strategicvanguard.com. Your support helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis on defense, geopolitics, and strategy. Until next time, stay informed, stay strategic.